The big issue that we head to next is the idea of capacity planning. So when you think of capacity, I don't know what runs through your mind. I have some sort of an industrial picture where somebody's producing a good and not necessarily a service, but they can only produce so much per unit of time. And so this idea of capacity is going to show up for us in the next sections, and we're going to have to try to figure out, okay, well, how do we solve capacity problems and or issues? So biggest question we have to ask is, if we are in charge of operating a business, does it have the ability to create, or I should say meet or exceed the demand for their product? And if you're asked or ever asked that question, what you're really being asked is a question about a production system's capacity. So let's think for just a minute. I went back and got this picture of iPhone sales since 2007. Somewhere in here, somebody at Apple had to properly forecast this surge, which nearly tripled their iPhone sales over the course of about 4 years. And then it leveled off, right? And even declined a little bit. So now you think, okay, well, in order for me to see this increase coming, I have to be able to have a forecast for the demand for my product. But equally important, seeing it level off. I don't want to overproduce, otherwise I'm going to have way too much idle capacity. Okay? All right, back to that word capacity. So when we think about capacity, we have to think of three separate or unique time frames. And they're not cut in stone. I can't say that it's a number of months or days or weeks. It's regions. It's planning that has to go on that's different in each time frame. So we've got to think of long-term, medium-term, and short-term planning, and we'll look at the issues that come along with each one of these types. Before we get there, let's define what we're trying to measure. Okay, so in business, when somebody says to you, we are producing at capacity, that typically means that we are making as much as possible given our current infrastructure. So our capacity can be measured by day, week, month, year, etc. But however we measure it, saying that we're operating at full capacity means that we are at the maximum amount of output that our particular process can handle. Okay? All right, so that's what the word capacity means. We'll also use the word capacity planning, so let's define it. So capacity planning is just a process. And what I have to do is I have to determine what the capacity is. Notice I'm using the word from above. What is the maximum amount that our operating system will need to meet demand effectively? Okay. So, back to this idea of Apple. How do I properly plan in 2010 for the surge in iPhone sales that's going to be there in 2015? And it's not going to be perfect, because looking into the future never is, but I need to at least be thinking about it. Okay. All right. Sometimes we have a gap. We have a gap between the capacity that I have available, so what is the maximum amount I can produce, less what's being demanded of our product. So this gap, also important. I want this gap to be positive. I don't want it to ever be negative. If it's negative, I'm sending people to my competitors to buy a product I wish I was selling. Okay? So capacity, the total amount that we're able to produce, capacity planning, figuring out a way to meet capacity in the future, and then the gap at any time period T, the difference between the capacity I have available and the demand for my product. All right, so back to these three time periods and the issues that come along with each. Okay, long-term needs. Here's that word demand again, and it's a word that hopefully, if you took econ from me, I tried to say, the idea is going to be around not only here but in other classes. So here it is again. If I am thinking long term, so if I'm thinking in 2020, what needs to be true at the University of Pikeville in 2025, I am doing some long-term planning. And what I need to do is have a forecast of what the demand for our service, in the case of the University of Pikeville, will be across the next several years. And how do I get there? Well, one way I get there, and I'm not sure Apple, I'd have to look and see what they were able to do. There's an upward trend. I'm sure they saw that, but I'm not sure anybody saw that between 2011 and 2015, the demand for iPhones would triple and then drop off or level out. So whoever did that bit of demand forecasting, maybe they still work for Apple, maybe they don't, but they seem to have met at least the tripling, right? So because those bar charts show actual sales. All right, other things that you have to think about when doing economic forecasting are cyclical patterns, and we're in one right now. Some people, I heard somebody on NPR yesterday saying that this coronavirus has made it so we look like we're in the depression, and I actually think that's kind of a load of crap, at least right now. I mean, who knows where it will lead, but the two are so different. But it'll cause a cycle. It'll cause this cutoff in production that we're going through right now. And then when things come back online and people go back to work, it's going to cause an expansion, and perhaps a fairly large one, as we try to catch up on what some might call pent-up demand. In the long term, there are certain decisions we have to make as well. What do we do with our production facility? Do we expand it? Do we contract it? Do we build something completely new? And, another question we might need to answer. If I am in charge of the retail distribution, where am I going to place my stores? Will I be able to handle the increase in sales of my product? All right, well, now we go to the medium term. The medium term, the problems are slightly different. We're in the process of trying to minimize the gap. So the distance between our maximum capacity and actual demand. So things that come up as issues in the medium term, they're listed here, but they're resource planning. So, if I need computer chips to build an iPhone, are the supplies of computer chips coming through in a timely fashion? Or do I need to find a secondary producer so that I never have problems building my iPhones? Do we have enough labor? Same kind of an issue. Labor is one of those resources that I can usually vary, and I can vary it fairly quickly. And the hope is the introduction of labor into the process increases my output. And do I have enough capital? Where I'm using capital in the economic sense of, do I have the machinery or tools necessary for production? And finally, questions about storage space. Some processes don't build inventory, but some processes do. And do I build inventory now for sales, 6 months from now? And if I do I have proper storage space? All right, so most of the decisions in the medium term are, do I need to make adjustments to the resources we use? And one of those resources includes my supply chain. Now, short term, different again. This is more, well, what are we doing this week? Do I have a balance across all of the work centers in my building? So, trying to think of a work center, I tried to come up with a picture, right, of a work center. And do I have, for all of these work centers, do I have enough product flowing through to keep each unit of labor busy? Okay, that's a legitimate question from day to day. And is it balanced? Balance means people not standing around waiting for work to come to them. Everybody is relatively busy almost all the time. And other things that I might do from day to day is I might look for bottlenecks in production. And where am I bumping my capacity constraints? Where, it's hard when you have several processes in a production process, and there's a bottleneck at one of those places, one of those workstations, right? Because everything's flowing toward the bottleneck, and then the bottleneck is holding up every process in front of it, right? So we need to identify these bottlenecks and solve the bottleneck problem. All right, this is the table 7.1, which I borrowed from your textbook, that gives you some sort of a summary of each of these capacity planning horizons. We'll spend a fair amount of time thinking of long-term planning, and a little bit of time with medium and short term. And that's the end of this video, but at least gets you an introduction into what we're going to study when it comes to capacity planning. So, see you next video.